Hello, folks. How y'all doing today? Today we have a little fable, myth, moral narrative for you today. Okay, and it is called "Manly Virtue" or "The Golden Calf." The leaven raises the whole loaf. It's a tale for young and old, so settle in and gather round. For now we learn by these folks' example. There was once a land of manly virtues. It was populated by free men who worked their free holdings with good cheer. They were a proud and noble people, each keenly aware of his place in the community of the whole, and each respected in proportion to his fulfillment of those duties he found himself owing to the whole. They were not on average rich, nor their upper class were not opulent, but they lived a life tempered by frugality, a life honestly toiling at their labors, a life differing in status but not kind from the rest. They were, in effect, an example to their kind, an aristocracy of merit, chosen to lead at those things they both were inclined to do and did better than others, not merely taken at random from among any living bodies that pay for power. Display and pomp were alien to their way and mores. It caused them to feel disgust rather than awe for those that engaged in such empty mockery of authority and power. Both authority and power being based upon respect for duty being well done in these people's estimation. Dignity and honor were earned by good work in the common cause. Their leaders were promoted based upon their potential merit to bring about good results for the folk, and demoted for failure or malfeasance of duty to do the same. Their state operated upon two principles: the will of the people shall be done, and the highest law is the well being of the people. The minimum duties for all male heads of households were paying a tax and serving as part of the call up force, and to put a fine point on it, producing more citizens to carry on the kind. These duties increased as one's social status, power, and wealth increased, and they were not free choices. More wealth and more power meant more obligation as well as more social status for services well done. The only ambition seemingly at play among them was to be thought of the best use to their family, their kin, and the rest of their kind in that order. And this animated them with a high regard for duty done well. They struggled mightily for high regard from their kin and kind, attempting to outdo each other in deeds of all sorts that were of use to their families, clans, and eventually to the nation as a whole. In this struggle, they were wise enough to keep sight of the fact that many men together can do what no one man alone can, that the whole is the sum of its parts plus that indelible factor which is life. This was a just, chaste, and honest people. Justice and not legality was the letter upon their hearts and actions. Lawyer and their way of lying at the bar was utterly unknown among them, and would not have been allowed. First, lying for a living to protect the guilty from their punishment would not be acceptable, and second, no person was allowed to take payment to help another plead at law. Thus, they kept dishonesty and the corrupt power of money out of their legal system, and they saved themselves the expense of a kvetching class of malcontents constantly plotting to use the law against them as a weapon. Their courts were simple and resembled our manorial courts of old. The older men of station acted as judges, and the other adult male citizens the jury, and each man presented his case. A law was either broken, and if so, then the penalty was paid either in kind or labor. And if it was a capital offense, there was a hanging or a burning. Simple, direct. Few laws made for the easy application of justice. Again, very direct, very conductive to honest justice sans legalism, and very hard to abuse by the deceptive, as the matters at hand were generally known to all involved. This system worked as such because the manly people held their word to be a bond. This people held that keeping to your father's 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 way was the tried and true way to ensure order, stability, and justice to the whole of the land. And the way of these people was to organize around patriarchal families that organized into clans, that were organized into villages, that further organized into regions, and then the whole nation as one. The father was the head of the household, provider, and in effect a mini monarch in his own personal realm. The mother, the keeper of the hearth, and therefore of the folk's greater tomorrow. The children brought up as the growing potential of that tomorrow, which all worked to see come to fruition. These freeholder households were more or less generally held by all adult male citizens who were more or less universally married and had several children to carry on their patrimony. They varied in size from here to there, but were generally large enough that a family of 5 to 10, and sometimes more, could live upon these homesteads, living upon their own labors. On these homesteads, these veritable mini monarchies, most everything needed for life was made by the freeholders and their families, though there was a limited but necessary amount of industrial production to manufacture those things more economically built on scale for domestic use. Generally, though, what could not be made was traded for at local and regional fairs, which were strikingly similar to our farmers' markets or producers' cooperatives. It should be pointed out that since they made their own food, clothes, and had an unabridged right to housing, they were, even in monetary poverty, quite rich in all the things needed to live and produce more of themselves. This is no small feat, my dear readers. These people's children, numerous and disciplined by labor, and taught young the rudiments of the fighting arts and the basics of letters, reading, and numbers by their father and mother. It seems that they were accustomed to send their children to what are almost equal to our old dame schools, where the few older spinsters and widows taught the children more advanced subjects, and the mothers and older children, who were more bright, acted as teachers' aides, so that rather than divide age groups, the children were more placed by ability. They seem to have had a more or less universal curriculum, and since there was almost no bureaucracy or administrative cost, it can be said that they were rather well educated at very little public expense for what amounted to a universal basic education. Also, it should be noted that rather than break up the family and community as regimented systems do, their social system tended to reinforce said bonds of affection among the community members, particularly the educational system affected this end. These people found their joy in music, literature, poetry, and other simple beauties of life. They sought to outdo each other in these life-affirming arts and found greater joy in a lovely song than most merchants of our land do in their golden trinkets, shiny and dead. They differed from ours and from most other societies in that they strove to ensure that all put in an honest day's labor, and that all were compensated with an honest living beholden to only their duties to society and the law. Early they learned to make money and exchanges done between them, as well as technological advances made by them, the servant of the folk, rather than let these master them as others have done to their doom. Trade was not allowed by them to change their ways, but only allowed in so much as it helped strengthen their ways and mores. The market they made secondary to the men that give that market substance, following something very similar to our ancient and nearly forgotten just price theory, i.e., that there is a just price for all goods and services such that both parties live a decent life and both are fairly remunerated in the exchange. Among them, nothing like speculation was known. Items are bought for use or stored until needed, or even perhaps traded for other goods or services. They were not bought with the idea of hoarding them until they were worth more later, as they were to these people worth the same eternally. Any attempts to change the customary prices resulted in, at best, prosecutions, and at worst, riots and the death of the thief and the jabber. All of this was very similar to our now almost forgotten guilds. They mastered money by outlawing private lending and by public control of both the volume and worth of the money supply, in a scheme rather similar to the idea called social credit, the idea being to line up the purchasing power of the citizens with the value of the goods they have to offer. Division of labor, in our sense, seems to have been minimal among them, being limited to the very least amount needed to keep them apace of new technology such that it could ensure that they were able to feed, clothe, house, and defend themselves well enough that any invasion of their lands would not be worth fighting the entire male population, house to house, street to street, village to village, in the attempt to accomplish. These people had the inner strength as well as the technological ability to destroy their own goods rather than see them stolen. And their motto, once fighting started, was no treaty or truce with any occupier of our lands, nothing for the invader. Consequently, they almost never suffered invasion, and when they did, the invaders paid dearly, and the people, though they suffered material privation, survived as a free sovereign folk. Thus we have manly virtue. At top a golden calf was indicated, and now we shall turn our mind's eye upon this lot. The land of the golden calf was separated by a sea from the land of manly virtue. It was an almost opposite land. In this land, gold and not the folk was paramount. There was a trio of gods among them, the calf, or as it was known among the vulgar, the market, Mammon, who is also known as greed, and Moloch, who personifies selfishness to the point of being willing to sacrifice the youth to the wants and comforts of old. These resided in the sacred precinct of the gods known as the Avenue. The market controlled all prices, production, consumer transactions, and had a monopoly upon the issuance of credit. If any in the land would buy or sell or live, they had to come and pay tribute, i.e. tax, to the great trio of calf, greed, and selfishness. And to truly prosper in this land, they had to live and exemplify the morals of their idols. There are really two peoples in this land. One who are numerically very insignificant, that are favored by the calf, and have all the money, wealth, and control the political offices, courts, police, and prisons. And the other, that work to pay the tribute to the calf, and who labor away and are given the crumbs of the system. The one uses power the calf has given them to ensure the other is kept low and servile. The one is not the other, and the other excluded from the one. The poor is equal, but the rich is double plus more equal. Wealth, however gotten, will gain you the favor of the calf, and gain an other entry into the one. Wealth lost equates a one to the other. However, the one is always trying to ensure that none of the other join the one by taxing them and putting them to fighting each other for crumbs like dogs, as they pick their pockets for the pennies yet remaining to the others. Thus in this land we find slavery, debt bondage, nepotism, favoritism, and all the selfish, underhanded, vile behavior that would be expected of a social order that encourages men to act like robbers, bandits, and thieves in all but name under the guise of freedom, liberty, and happiness. The myth was that all are equal before the golden calf. The reality was that the select few have all the freedom, liberty, and happiness they could seek, and they use it to bask in the light of the golden calf with Moloch and Mammon as their comforters. This trio then orders the laws such that the few have legal power with which to force the others to work under threat of police, poverty, and prisons to pay the price tag for the few's lavish lifestyles. The myth was that all are equal, but in reality not all have wealth. To not have wealth was to not matter by holy edict of the market. Those that cannot pay were put into slavery until they were of no use, and then they were exiled to parts unknown or just cast into the sea as the market dictated. Men were reduced to material goods. There were debt bondage emporia in each town, where such wretches were sold like so much cattle and with just as much fuss. Men were merely commodities to be sold before the calf like any other, at profit. To the Kaffirs, the golden Kaffirs, society is but a shorthand for human resource pool. Thus, they do not find it odd nor immoral that people should be used, tossed out, and then disposed of, just as the calf, Mammon, and Moloch demand of them. These people were always unhappy with what they had and needed more and more and more, infinitely. Their entire economy and way of life depended upon always having more. For some, for a lot of others, it meant always having either the same or less. These people in their restless greed found the land of manly virtue and proceeded to attempt an invasion. As their army was made of servile and weak manlings, whose only motivation was greed, and as they faced the manly people who loved both their land and themselves more than any amount of money, the Kaffirs' forces were crushed at each attempt. They were put to great task. They came almost to a panic, to a fever pitch, and then they set upon a design, a nefarious plot, an inversion of common sense so bold that it might succeed where force had failed. They called together all the youth of their nation that could pass for fair, and that could lie best and with most convincing demeanor. These they sent as refugees from the market, and they were to say that they came in peace and only desired to live freely in a small parcel of land. It was believed that the manly people would believe this, and this lie was believed, and the fifth column taken in and allowed to slowly do its work. First, the natural attractions between sexes wrought unions among them of man and wife, and this allowed for some of the citizens of manly virtue to be raised by golden Caffres, and thus to slowly, over time, morph the one society into the other like a pathogen replicating itself by mutating its host, until out of what was once fair there came forth only foul. For any good that occurred among any in the land of the golden calf was more than offset by a degradation and marginalization of manners among the former virtuous people. This continued until one was the other and the other was the one, and there was only the market left feasting freely upon the ruins of this once great folk. And thus the leaven. By this means the manly folk were subjected to those that never in a million eons would have been able to subdue them by force. Thus was destroyed their way of life, and thus was an end put to their being as they were mixed away before the golden calf's market as Mammon and Moloch cackled in delight. The lesson is that one must resist the golden calf and its false lies, else one's people become like the manly people, slaves, subject to the market's whim. Since things are not always what they seem, and what seems fair and golden may end as a poisoned chalice full of malice. The end.